I'm going to put that mic down because it feels weird to hold it. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Glad to be here on our two of these a year, right? Two community meetings. We had one in spring. My name's Jonathan Russell. I'm the new-ish director for Alameda County Health, Housing, and Homelessness. We are obviously a county agency that is relative to the COC. We are the collaborative applicant, so we're the operational entity that submits for the HUD-NOFO application on behalf of the community. And a lot of other things, including coordinated entry management entity as well. And more broadly throughout the county, we're the agency at the county level that is tasked with coordinating all of our partners, including our wonderful city jurisdiction partners, some of which are represented here, toward ending homelessness. So part of that process, including with the COC, is having a 5-year plan. And what that is going to be, as Mo mentioned, we started the current plan in 22 timeframe. It officially started. And so we actually, hard to believe, as of July of this year, we entered year 4 of that current plan. And that plan is summarized here in really 4 big objective areas. So we will share the website out of kind of where you can access this to on the county's website. If you type in homelessness in Alameda County, it should be the first website that pops up, and it's under the reports there. But broadly, there was really 4 main areas, 4 kind of objective areas that informed that plan and the community, kind of the directives that came out of the community process. And those were prevention, so the need to prevent homelessness, obviously connecting people to shelter and needed resources, that's the second priority. Increasing housing solutions, which is kind of the no-duh part of what we need to do to end homelessness, which is expand housing opportunities. And then also strengthen coordination, communication, and capacity.
Because my brain is like overwhelmed.
There's someone that might need to mute if they can.
We have the homeless encampment mapping meeting. I don't think that's going to take an hour. I know Holly's scheduling an hour for that. Is that
somebody mute yourself? You're really embarrassing yourself.
Yeah, people need to mute.
Can I not be there? I guess is my question.
Administrators of the meeting, mute everyone.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I will be less than an hour, but I think the meeting is going to be a little longer. And then the 4th priority area was really to strengthen coordination, communication, and capacity of the system as a whole. So to date, as we said, we're entering year 4. This is kind of just a really high-level summary, kind of talking about where we've been, because really the priority to focus on today is about where we're going. And where we're going is going to be a community process. As it was to create the original Home Together 2026 plan. So we're calling this a refresh because we think that the high level goals are evergreen, right? We need more resources, we need to prevent homelessness, we need to connect people to housing, and we need to coordinate better. But really the findings of that first year plan were that, of course, to really reduce homelessness and racial inequities, which were the primary focuses of that plan and will continue to be our primary focus. There was a need, based on all of our system modeling and data, that we need 24,000 housing resources over that 5-year period, new housing resources. Now that includes, of course, building a lot of housing, that includes subsidies to support people moving into existing housing, and the estimated cost for operations. The total cost estimation for that? Thank you. The total estimated cost for that 5-year period was $2.5 billion, just operationally, to expand and make those investments necessary to sustain those resources. So as of year 2 of the plan, which was just over a year ago when that finished, as we've now entered, of course, year 4, a year and a couple months later, we've seen that the homeless response system has expanded significantly, both in its capacity and coordination. There are now about 25,000 people a year that are served just through the homeless management information system. So just in HMIS, which we know does not incorporate everyone that experiences homelessness, but there's of course been a huge swell in need. And resources have expanded. We've seen more people housed in the second year of the plan than ever before in Alameda County, over almost 4,100 people, so over 4,000 people were housed, but 4,300 plus people fell into homelessness. So we're still seeing more people enter homelessness than exit. But of course, we still need, again, more housing opportunities to really bend that curve. We've also seen some improvements in the systemic inequities, the racial disparities in homelessness, particularly in returns to homelessness, where we have seen year over year significant racial disparities, both in who falls into homelessness and Black and Indigenous populations being most overrepresented. And we also saw higher rates of returns among Black and Indigenous populations from having already exited homelessness. So while we've seen some of those disparities go down, still the systemic disparities, the structural inequities that lead to the housing deprivation that we often call homelessness are still there. So our system, of course, is still experiencing significant disparities. And of course, lack of new investments, the need for new investments has really stalled some of our projects. You can see on the graph, if you can look above the kind of orange graph, the top graph shows the current investment needs, year 1 being on the bottom and year 5 being the top. You can see those light orange bars getting bigger. And the darker orange above it shows the actual funds that came into the county across all cities, county, nonprofits, philanthropy over the course of that year. So you can see actually in the first year, we were pretty close to our targeted investments. That's because COVID was happening, right? And there was a lot of one-time investments that came into the community. But even in year 2, we saw starting to fall behind. Now the thing's not moving. So in that, oh, that worked. I'll just touch the mouse pad. So just at a high level, what is the refresh, right? For context, we're the planning and policy entity for the COC and also the county more broadly. So we will really be project managing that. We're going through and supporting it. The original plan, as we said, was adopted by the COC Leadership Board, the Conference of Mayors, the Board of Supervisors, and as we enter that 4th year, we've decided as a community that, you know what, it's time to do a new plan now. In a lot of ways, we've learned a lot in this current plan, but as Lachey and others in public comment were saying, like the world has changed significantly, even just this year, right? And we want to be responsive to that. We don't want a plan that's just a dusty thing that sits on a shelf. We want a plan that is speaking to the now, and also that is ready and available to leverage new resources. So I think we're all very clear working in this sector that there are significant barriers that have come up in the current political climate and changes, both in terms of grants passed and the executive order at the state level following that. But there are also resources on the horizon, including things like Proposition 1 that will create more funding for housing. That is very much a mixed bag. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that if I work for government, but it is, right? There's positives and there's negatives. But we want to write a plan that is ready to respond and leverage funding that is available, and a plan that continues to speak to the truth of what actually works to end homelessness, and that we're going to continue to prioritize our resources in that way. So we've got a lot of recent data. We've got a most recent point in time count of which the initial figures have been released, and literally, hopefully within the next week or so, the full report will be out for the 2024 point in time count. We've got a lot more, of course, HMIS data and all the performance data that's happened since then, and all the learnings from the first few years of the plan. We also went through a process over the course of 2023 of developing a framework. Hi, Arlene. We missed your public comment, but we're gonna. We also went through a process to develop a prevention framework, right? What does this community need to really prevent homelessness, to stop, as I described, that 4,300 people just in 1 year that fell into homelessness? We want a plan that can incorporate that can talk concretely and make decisions around investing in prevention. Which I should also say, prevention is the most impactful place that we can prevent racial disparities, is prevent the disproportionate inflow into homelessness, right? So that's a really important measure and focus for us in relation to our priorities of racial equity and justice. We have the opportunity to work on a new system modeling tool with a local partner in All Home, who's really been developing a helpful tool through their system modeling work and the regional action plan and a recent update to that. Being cognizant of my note to not use acronyms, which I need to do a good job of, a better job of. So I will feel free to call me out in the middle and say, like, I don't know what you're talking about, explain that acronym. And then also really just, we need to double down on our efforts to be aligned, right? We need to double down on our coordination. We need to own that at the cities and the county level, right? Just because laws change doesn't mean that what actually works to serve people changes. And so we really want to hold the center on that and stay committed to doing what works and developing a homelessness response system that can leverage resources and focus on housing. Okay, so just really quickly at a high level, objectives here. Obviously, first and foremost, we want to center equity and justice. That is, of course, racial justice, gender justice, ethnicity, disability, all the different aspects, all the intersectional ways that equity and justice show up in both contributions to homelessness, but also how we need to develop systems that address them. We want to also provide, here's one of the pathways here, our community meeting, multiple different ways to make input for stakeholders more accessible so that folks can really help shape the plan and provide feedback. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We want it to be a process that's collaborative and efficient and inclusive and really strengthens and clarifies the relationships. Who does what in the system? Where are we duplicating? Where can we save money to spend more on serving folks? And where do we need to share the load in terms of responsibility? So getting really clear about that is another goal. We want to ensure that the plan is centered on folks with lived experience, right? That it's data-driven, that it's action-oriented. It's not just some big picture of how much it's going to cost that can be super depressing, but like, what are we going to do with the dollars we do have to make sure we're having an impact? And how are we going to be accountable to that, right? And also that it can evolve over time. Like I said, since we launched this plan, 3-4 years ago, the world has changed significantly. There are seismic shifts happening in the systems of care in California and potentially more, as Prop 36 was mentioned, which we hope doesn't come to pass. But again, even if those things come to pass, that's all the reason more that we need to be laser focused on what actually works relative to homelessness. And so we want to be responsive to that. And you need a plan that's nimble because of that, because more changes might happen in the coming years, and so we need to be responsive to that. And then, of course, we need to have really concrete metrics. How are we performing to that plan? Are we meeting our equity goals? Where can we each year really do deep dives to help provide concrete feedback on what's working and what's not? So the key pillars really are updating our system modeling. System modeling just being a fancy way to say, looking at all the data of who's coming into homelessness, what's being successful, what's not, to really model how we need to lead our investments going forward. We need to update our racial equity analysis. Alameda County was a real forerunner, I think, in doing some really empowering and insightful work through the Centering Racial Equity Report in 2019-2020, which was our kind of grounding racial equity analysis of the homelessness response system that helped inform Home Together. We need to update that, right? We need to look at the inequities now and look at the performance of the system now. We also need to identify strategies and really refine what we're focusing on, right? It's one thing to say we need more housing, but how are we really going to get concrete about how we're going to create that based on the modeling and the equity analysis? And then we need to have robust engagement with our residents that are experiencing this crisis we're trying to ameliorate. So those are the real key pillars. The roles, not the most exciting part, but worth covering. Obviously, H&H, our department will be kind of the project management entity as the policy and planning entity. So it's helping to quarterback the process through and move through all those stakeholder engagements and planning and drafting phases. The COC Leadership Board will really serve as a regular public forum for getting updates on the various work streams and supporting the COC participation in the planning process. And really will ultimately adopt the plan in the same way that, hopefully our elected bodies in the county will too. And of course, our COC committees and all the various expertise and focus of their work will continue to provide input and expertise in those areas, both in potentially having participants working on some of the work groups, but also getting regular updates and providing forums for feedback and concrete input. The work group framework will really be 3 groups. There'll be a task force that's kind of overseeing the executive level overall process, and that'll be a diverse array of stakeholders across the county. There'll be a specific work group working on all that system modeling. There'll be a specific work group working on the racial equity analysis part of the sub work. And all of those will be, at least 50% of the folks on there will be COC representatives, and then including beyond. So we've had an open application process for folks that are interested. We've got some great responses, and we're excited about that. And the timeline, tentatively, is that we'll look to finalize these groups and the kind of overall network of who's going to participate in the November timeframe. So hopefully this coming month. And then really jump into the work group work between November and spring of next year. Begin looking concretely about those strategies. Okay, based on all this data and learnings, what are we going to really target to do in the next 5 years as we get from spring to summer of next year? And then start really building a narrative to have something ready to look at in a more concrete way by fall of next year. So that we can put together, I wanted to call it Home Together Forever, which sounds like a cool sequel to like a Marvel movie or something, but it's going to be Home Together 2030. Again, we have some, we wrote up on the wall here, you can see, thanks to the home-based folks, each of those 4 kind of pillars that we talked about on the first slide, we have those written down. So strategies for coordination, prevention, shelter, and housing inventory. Part of the reason we want to do this up front today was to get feedback, right? To hope that in some ways, you all as a community, knowing that we're going to dive into a planning process for our next 5 years, we're requesting that you think about that today, right? As we have these discussions, use, we have the index cards, that's what they're called. If you want to jot down ideas or things that you think are important to focus on, or also jot them on the back 4 pillars, posters back there. We think those pillars are kind of evergreen, right? So we're not changing our top level priorities. We're wanting to really dive into strategies. So we wanted to get your feedback. We wanted that to help inform your thinking over the next 2 days. And so we've got some ideas, prompts here, if you want to think about, and things you want to draft down. So for example, what's one positive impact of the current plan? If you're familiar with it, that has been there, right? What are some positives we can lift up that we want to feed forward and focus on? What are areas that we need to improve on, that we need to own that we did not do well, or that we didn't even focus on in the plan, in the first plan, that we need to continue forward? What's the single most important thing about this next plan from your perspective? What issues are impacting and impeding my work that we think the plan needs to address? And what's the best way to keep the community informed on what's happening with the plan refresh? So what's the best way to keep having those stakeholder and community coordination and feedback sessions available? So you can put it up on there if you want to talk about specific strategies. You can write it on your index card, and you can also email further feedback to us at ohccinfo@acgov.org. And I think that's it. How much time do we have? Do we have time for initial discussion, and then we go? Great. We've got 10 minutes if folks have questions, comments, or immediate feedback as we get started here. Andy.
So you started by saying that 25,000 people had been entered into HMIS.
Yep.
And only 4,000 of those were actually served. And less than 20%.
Yes, good math. Let me clarify, this second graph on the bottom goes into a little bit more detail. So 4,000 people were housed, so 4,000 people exited the housing, to your point. That many more than that were served, right? About 25,000 throughout the year are in our homelessness response system. Almost 6,000 of those are already in housing, just receiving sustaining services, right? So there's 6,000 people of that are in housing, permit support housing, right, where the services don't end. 4,000 were people that exited into housing. And as you said, yeah, there's 18,000 people through the course of the year that are in various stages of connection to services, experiencing homelessness, that did not receive a permanent housing resource. So it's a little bit more complex, but yeah, to your point, much as we housed more people than ever in that year, we still have an overwhelming amount of people in the system.
Jonathan, can I just add to the data?
Yeah,
so just to, the 25,000 people are all people that were served in the system, like anyone who touched the system, who received a service or was enrolled in a program. So that's how their information is in HMIS. And then about 30%, like 28 to 30% of those people are supported in permanent housing programs ongoing. So if you take that out, there are still 18,000 people that are served by the system in a program. Maybe they're in shelter, maybe they've received, outreach from the outreach program, any number of things, but those are people who are still considered, they're experiencing homelessness because they're not housed. And then, like Jonathan is saying, it's in some ways a great accomplishment to have over 4,000 people who were transitioned from experiencing homelessness to gained permanent housing, but there are still many more within that 18,000 who need a resource to resolve their homelessness. So just wanted to clarify the data. And I think that, in HMIS and kind of looking at the pit count data, it seems like over time there has been an increasing matchup of and better outreach and data entry so that more people experiencing homelessness are being captured and reflected in our HMIS system, but we know it's never going to be 100%.
Right. Thank you for that, Jen. Jen's our policy and communications coordinator who really leads the kind of stuff, so she's the expert. And last thing on that, I will say, the people that weren't served were because we don't have a resource, right? It's a resource problem that is the primary driver of that being. We have 4,000 resources to house people, and the amazing work of this community, my good friend JC among them, like one by one, we house people with those resources, but we have this, we have a deep scarcity versus how many we need in terms of housing. James. I think we got a mic set. James, on here. Hello.
Thank you. A couple of years ago, San Francisco boasted that they knew the names of every person in the city who was homeless, where they are located, and what their issues are. My question is, how robust is the HMIS program? Are we, because people who are not in structured environments, at least in Oakland, don't get services, don't get contacted. How robust are we, or do we plan to make the HMIS program more robust by reaching out and being able to identify everybody who's homeless, whether they're in housing or structured situation or not?
Great question, James. Thanks for it. I think we need to be honest that HMIS is a hard system to keep refreshed and to keep the data clear, right? We know that if you touch the system, you're in the system, right? But there are a lot of people that experience homelessness that for many reasons, I'm not going to go to the Housing Resource Center, or that's not me, or it's not accessible to me because I'm not in an environment where outreach is connecting to me. So we know there's a lot of folks, particularly folks that might not fit the visible stereotype we have of homeless, right? Which is street homeless in an encampment, very visible or connected in a shelter. There's a lot of folks on the periphery that experience homelessness, and I will say that resolve their homelessness without touching our system at all. So I think we miss a lot of folks. That's a point that's really important. We also have folks that touch our system that we don't get updates, right? That might not be homeless anymore, and now they're still sitting in the system. So there's two things. There's we have overrepresentation of folks that might have touched the system at one point and we don't know what happened after, right? Because they had a resolution on their own or they moved somewhere else. And then we've got folks that aren't even in the system. So I don't think those two categories balance out, but I do think it's important for us to think of that number being at least as big as that 25,000. So to your second point, is there plans to make it better? Yes, I think, but at the same time, it's kind of like, what do we want to spend our limited resource and time on, right? Like getting better and better data on these high level numbers, or getting better and better at serving the people that we can connect with in terms of our investments. So I think that there's some data investments, but a big part of it is outreach. We do need to scale our outreach into those, as you described, those structured environments to get connected, right? And to get people in the system. But I don't want to sound cynical. I don't want to just get people in the system to get them in the system, right? We want to get housing resources into folks' hands, and so that's the real balance, I think.
Just to clarify, you
Yeah.
guys, so Continuum Care makes policies governing over the outreach that I guess other nonprofits or agencies do to the unhoused community?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, formally, the COC oversees the federal funding that comes in and the policies around that. So the funding from HUD and the related to things like coordinated entry. Yeah, so there's some policy oversight. But of course, local jurisdictions, cities, county, as a kind of overall jurisdiction, also make decisions for investments in outreach that use other dollars than COC dollars. But yeah, this really is kind of a community hub for what are our priorities going to be.
I asked that just because of being homeless for 10 years,
Yeah.
being out there, and then even still going out to see my friends that are still unhoused and stuff.
Yeah.
I noticed that like outreach usually only comes when there's close to an eviction coming for people.
Right.
And then every now and then there's like harm reduction, small street fairs and stuff. And I was just wondering, like, is there a way to divert money to more personal outreach?
Yeah.
Because the outreach like the Whisper Commons does is when we bring out a barbecue grill, we do have a harm reduction, and I'm very simple with the way that we reach out to people. We have our Bluetooth speaker out there, we try to have music, we hang out, and I feel like just if we had maybe more funding towards more personalized outreach, we could stay in contact and do more and help building people where they're at and not waiting for them to get, if they into one of the shelters, hopefully that is really not helping them. It's just damaging the fabric of their life before they even get into permanent housing. So it's just
I think that's fantastic feedback, and I would love, let's make sure we memorialize that on a comment card. That's the kind of feedback I think we want. Where should our investments be? What kind of outreach needs to be scaled, right? We know that it is very limited now, and I see your outreach. I follow you on Instagram. Good work. But yeah, like note that. That's the kind of feedback we want to hear for sure. What kind of time do we
around 10, maybe last hour?
Okay. That's true.
I was just wondering, like, for me, I'm living at it was for recovery, but actually I'm kind of like forced to be there to have a roof over my head. Things have changed in my favor for that, because I would have been out on the streets by finishing the program, because after 6 months, if you can't pay, because Alameda County stops paying or they don't accept, they don't allow you to stay, but they want you to retire VA too for fees. I don't have kids, and I've been with HMIS in the coordinated entry system for one since back like in 2017, but like continuing to stay updated and stay in contact with them consistently since I got released, just short stint at Santa Rita since 2021 or 22. And I've been on the straight path, and taking care of myself or like help those that help themselves or whatever. And so I was just wondering, like, what is the questionnaire that could be changed? My number I hear is high to get the aid, but what is questionnaire that can change for even the reasons that I was unhoused prior to addiction or being homeless? Because addiction doesn't always come before the homelessness. It sometimes comes during and after. So that shouldn't be the stigma that I feel like sticks with me, you know, I have reasons prior to that, being a youth and then some that led me to homelessness, you know, so I wish that some of that questionnaire could change, or reason of having been a foster care and then it's just something else, like, what is that for?
Yeah.
You know, have you ever had a, like, yeah, so that's.
First of all, thank you for saying that truth, that a lot of the things that we think are causes are actually effects of homelessness, right? And I think that that's a really important point to raise about, like, the questionnaire or the assessment. And just really quickly, I mean, part of it is we have a severe shortage of resources, right? So based on the sort of direction from HUD, and I think it also matches local priorities, like, we need to make sure we're prioritizing resources for folks most at risk. So we have very imperfect ways of screening for that, right? And even in screening for that, there's a lot more people that need and deserve permanent supportive housing than we have permanent supportive housing to offer. Also, people need more than just permanent supportive housing. There are a lot of folks for whom that's not the need, but a lot of our resources, state, federal, and local, are designed to provide that limit, you know, that support for folks based on particular needs. Some of the other screening questions, again, very imperfect, like the youth screening questions or the foster involvement or whatever. Those also help us pick out, because there are some resources federally and locally that are designed to serve specific populations. So those are ways to screen for, oh, maybe this is an eligibility thing, right? It's not just to do what is totally uncomfortable, like, let me tell you everything in my life when I sit down and fill out a screening survey. But it is imperfect, and I think that's also where we're constantly wanting to refine and make sure we're not missing the real key vulnerabilities, and are constantly looking at our assessment to say, is this actually creating inequities versus addressing them, right? And so that is a constant question. So again, I would love to talk to you maybe at the break about what are those specific areas that you feel like, in my story, my experience, are like not capturing the reality of need, because we need to hear it. Boom, okay, we'll go grab it. Okay, I think we need to go to the next thing. Thanks, everybody.